How's it going, gamers? Today, I want to talk about a topic with regards to Marvel Snap that often comes up, and that's power creep. Power creep, if for those not familiar, is the concept that as card games mature, the cards they release tend to get stronger to make them more relevant. Something that I've heard a lot in Marvel Snap content creation over the years is I have a hard time keeping up. I can't get every release, so I can't be competitive. And this kind of thought process turns into this circular feedback loop because a lot of content that myself and other content creators are making is hyper focused on newer cards because that's what people generally want to see. So even if those newer cards aren't overpowered, people feel compelled like they need to add them to their collection. Today, I want to take a look at some metrics and talk about what they mean and my thoughts on power creep in Marvel Snap for some of our recent months worth of card releases. Let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? I don't like to bury the lead in a video like this, so let's go ahead and throw the data for our last 2 months worth of card releases up on the screen. Above my head, we have the 4 cards that have released so far for the current month, April, and off to the side over here, we have the 6 cards that came out over the course of March. This data is utilizing the top 50% of players in Infinite for the last 7 days as of my recording of this data on Untapped. Based on the average cubes and win rates here, as well as my own anecdotal experience with these cards, I would describe the last 2 months of Marvel Snap card releases as something of a drought of playable Marvel Snap cards. In fact, if we look at the handful of cards that have good results here, there's a couple of key things worth pointing out. The first is that our 2 best cards, Goliath and Starbrand, they're really not very interesting in the slightest. They are literally just good, efficient stat sticks. In Goliath's case, it's one you have to synergize and build around. He slots into Spectrum decks, which have always been pretty reasonable, and he's a solid upgrade for them. They definitely want him. And Starbrand has a downside you have to mitigate with things like Sauron or Zero, but he also just works as an efficient pile of stats in things like Sarah Control that are playing things like Enchantress to mitigate his downside. Our 3rd best performer, in this case, Khonshu, is a card that's slotted into an existing good deck, the Apocalypse discard deck, allowing them to have more top end that they don't mind binning with Corvus, giving them a clean upgrade for a deck that's already reasonable. Based on Corvus Khonshu's win rate and average cubes inside of that deck, it's also not clear from looking at the variations that he's actually a meaningful upgrade to that archetype and isn't simply the best place that you can play him where he adds some value without bringing everything down to too much. Moving along to the 4th best performing card by these stats released in the last 2 months, we have Kahori. She at least has an over 50% win rate still, and she's slightly positive average cubes, but her data comes with a large asterisk here. Her data in this sample is from when she had weekend missions going on, meaning players were incentivized to win with her to get extra collector's tokens, which means that when a card is weak, like I would wager Kahori is, she ends up getting shoved into decks like Thanos and Arishem, where she likely does not belong in order so people can get easy wins without drawing her super frequently. In my experience, when a card rotates out of the weekend missions, if it's not a powerful new metagame staple, its stats often fall off dramatically because players are no longer obligated to play with it and aren't shoving it into decks that are good that don't gain value from it anymore. Captain Carter, as our 5th best performer here, is a very similar story, I would wager. Her metrics are likely going to fall off similar to Kahori once people are no longer obligated to leverage her to get prizes for their weekend missions. Then, when we look at everything past these 5, we have really pretty mediocre stats for all of these cards, many of which are pretty interesting designs across the board. So, where am I going with all this? Whenever any type of game balance comes up around Marvel Snap or any other card game, there's always plenty of folks that just offer up the useless suggestion of they should just balance better and get it right the first time. I'm definitely not suggesting that. I've been in this space long enough and understand that there's a lot of moving parts and different things to figure out, and all of us out in the real world are going to play way more games with these cards and figure things out that are good or bad much quicker than Second Dinner ever could with their smaller team back at their office. Heck, even a fairly large team for a big card game is going to play way fewer games in their testing circles than all of us out in the world hammering games away on the internet are going to play in even the first day. That being said, I think Second Dinner could leverage the tools that they have at their disposal better to make a lot of these card releases feel more interesting and exciting. I think, in my opinion, I would prefer if they released a number of these cards simply more powerful with the intention to dial them back if they released and ended up being busted. That being said, I know that people are going to be apprehensive when I say that, so I think the opposite approach is also fine as well. If they're going to be releasing cards with numbers like they've been releasing, I think they need to be ready to be willing to push those up in a quick and timely manner rather than leaving them to rot. We even saw a relatively quick response in the terms of first Ghost Rider. It went from a 2-5 up to a 2-6 while still languishing, but I'm glad they at least relatively quickly addressed this card. I think our most recent card release in Infinity Ultron is a perfect example of what I'm talking about here. This card is one of the most interesting designs we've had added to Marvel Snap in a long time. It generates cards, it generates a huge range of cards. The range of cards has so many different abilities and numbers on it, and I think it's just really sad that Infinity Ultron released in such an undertuned state. I genuinely think they could probably add +1 to every one of Ultron's stones and Ultron himself, and there is a chance that he's still not this format dominating card, but he's definitely better than he is right now. I think that in general, rather than playing it safe and they think, okay, all of these numbers are fine where they're at, they should do what I just suggested with Ultron and +1 them up. And if it comes out and it's over the top, you take your OTA and you pull it back down a little bit. But I think the absolute worst case is kind of what we're currently experiencing for the last couple of months. If you're someone who's been playing Marvel Snap constantly, like myself, since I've been back, a bunch of these cards might as well never have released. If I'm playing with them, I'm often feeling bad while playing with them because they're underpowered, and I'm effectively never playing against them once they're no longer obligated to be played due to weekend missions because they're so weak, they're just going to get picked apart by everything else that people are doing that is more competitive. I think especially designs like Firehair and Infinity Ultron and Khonshu and First Ghost Rider and Isan, some of these weakest performing cards here are some of the ones that they should be taking the most risks with because they're cards that encourage you to build your deck in an interesting manner. It feels like the only cards that we frequently get pushed with playable stats in Marvel Snap are the Star Brands and the Goliaths and the Iron Patriots and the Sam Wilsons of the world, which are just kind of generically good cards that end up going into the tech card mush decks, for lack of a better term, that we've seen be dominant in Marvel Snap for many months now. In general, I think Marvel Snap would probably be better off and more engaging for a lot of folks, especially myself, if they took bigger swings in OTAs at least once a month. While obviously not every change can be reworked to tons of different cards, it would be nice if we got changes that were more than just a +1 and -1 in stat lines across a variety of different cards. Looking back at the historical OTA data as of my recording of this, the last time we got a change that wasn't just a nominal stats change was when Adam Warlock got a really awesome rework at the start of February. It's now the middle of April, so it's been effectively 2 months since we had a new toy to play with from that avenue. I think these type of OTA reworks like Adam Warlock is one of those interesting things Marvel Snap has going on for it. Things like Spider-Man's rework, Snow Guard's rework, even Magic going from a 5-3 down to a 3-2 were some of the most awesome changes that made me excited to dive in and brew and work in Marvel Snap, and I wish we could see some of those a little bit more consistently. One of the downsides to Marvel Snap's current release cycle is that they don't have big sets to create a churn or injection of new things, and their OTAs are kind of serving the same purpose, except they don't do that when there's such nominal changes week in and week out. Some of you might be wondering why I put this video together, and the reason is relatively straightforward. I was trying to think about how I could put together a best decks roundup this week where I recommend things to play with the new card, where I explicitly try to, even if they're not the best decks imaginable, be relatively competitive, but also actively want to play the new card. Infinity Ultron genuinely doesn't have a single deck that I've played with where it feels like it actively wants him. Even the decks that have the best stats featuring Infinity Ultron that I tried off of Untapped felt like basically every game where I drew Infinity Ultron and I could play him, I didn't want to. It was basically never optimal. There were always other better things to be doing with my resources, and I felt like had my Infinity Ultron been literally any other card, I would have been better off in most of the games where I drew him, because those other cards might have been able to work into my curve alongside the other things the deck actually wanted to be doing. They all felt like decks where Infinity Ultron was just there for the sake of saying they were playing the card, and that's something that I personally don't like to recommend, because I don't like saying, hey, play this Infinity Ultron deck, but actually it's this other deck that just has this thing shoved in on top. And I think that's really sad. I think Infinity Ultron, like I said earlier, is one of the most interesting designs to come to Marvel Snap in a long time, and I really wish they would have taken some risks with his stat lines and how his kit works in order to let him be a sweet and powerful thing to be doing that we could all be excited to play, as opposed to something that we're going to sigh and shove into Thanos or Arishem and then queue up at High Voltage or the Proving Grounds to get our 200 collector tokens and move on until they either buff this card in a future OTA or he lies forgotten on the floor as we move along to whatever release is coming up next that will hopefully be much better. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through this video. I know it was a little bit rambling, a little bit different than the decklist roundups I've been doing on this channel. I would love to hear from you and your thoughts down below, not only on this topic. Do you think Marvel Snap should release more powerful cards? Do you think they should buff them faster? Do you think I'm on point here? Do you like that we've had a bunch of misses and only a few hits? I would love to hear why in the comments down below. If you happen to be new here and you enjoy rambles like this and good deck list roundups, when there's deck list roundups worth doing, consider subscribing to the channel and coming back again sometime. I appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end, and I hope you hit your snapping goals as our ladder season is coming to an end here in a couple of weeks, whatever they may be.